felt it go off.
Yeah.
There's a thing that says here, try sharing your broadcast to friends or groups to build your audience more quickly. I don't know how to do that.
No, please don't. Screw it up. You're still okay. I'll just wait another
It's
minute
two
for
people.
somebody. Huh?
Doesn't say, there's two people, I think,
Oh,
but I
okay.
don't know.
All right, so it doesn't tell us who. That's
No,
fine.
oh, Steve Morris.
Hi, Steve. So, welcome to the back of Tim J. Leary Studios. We're here in my studio tonight, and I am going to talk about texture and the like. I always like to start with a libation. You know, they say, oh, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, so I can report that it is 5 o'clock in Palm Springs. And so I always bring a little something. So there it goes. A little wee nip, as they would say in Ireland and Scotland. So cheers, everyone. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is texture, but it's really much broader than that. I guess my topics are typically more broad, but I've been thinking lately about my assemblage work and wondering how did I get here and why don't I stop? Why do I keep wanting to do more of it? And so in my thoughts about that, I realized that I have been intrigued by texture and layers in art all along. So, so I want to speculate out loud. I don't know the answer to my question. I have some ideas, and I'll share them. I started making art in earnest in the mid-70s. And so as I look around at some of this stuff, it strikes me that this is some of the things that, or these are some of the things that intrigued me then visually, and that I'm still refining. So I guess as with any artist, I'm following something. I'm following a path. I'm following a muse, if you will, something that I'm trying to understand. So I mean, much of this was born out of my career as a visual merchandiser. I've always felt that that was sort of a three-dimensional collage work when I did window displays. And a lot of the work that I did there was bringing things together. That was the purpose of it. We'd bring items from various parts of the store and present them together to create an idea of a lifestyle or something, so that the customers, the viewers of that art, could maybe get an idea that it fit into their life and then maybe want something. Now, this is just about self-expression. So I can remember back in the 60s, my parents had a painting. I have no idea whatever happened to it. A large canvas that had what looked like gold leaf squares. I'm sure they weren't really gold leaf. I'm sure they were just foil. And a burst of color in the corner of it. And in that burst of color, there was sand in the paint. And I remember loving that. And that was, something else that stuck in my mind. So I brought some books, of course. And the first one is, so in terms of texture, there are various ways that texture can happen, and various forms, various ideas about what texture is. So I have Van Gogh here, and this painting here is just to demonstrate that in much of his work, when he started doing flowers like the famous sunflowers, he would do globs of paint on a canvas. He often did a painting in a day. He would do his plein air paintings, his outdoor paintings in a day. He'd take his easel out and do that. So here you have an example, if you can see it, I'm not sure. I'm sure in person it's much more visible. But in this painting, there are globs of paint. So that creates texture, but it also creates a little sculptural form on the outside, but the painting starts to move out from the canvas and, toward you. So there's also the appearance of texture. The way he painted a sky, like in this painting, he used short strokes, and it created a sense of, almost a sense of an atmosphere, a textural sense of an atmosphere. So I think that that's kind of interesting, just as an observational point, that that texture can be a lot of things. And I'm going to come back to that. I think that that's all I have of this one tonight. And I can also then go directly, I'm going to go to this. I've talked about George Seurat's drawings before, because I think they're quite magnificent. And he created the appearance of texture in his drawings. These are done on these drawings, and there's so many of them in this book. These drawings are done on a really nubby paper in Conte crayon, in a wax crayon. And the way he applied the crayon to the paper creates it captures the threads or whatever is in this paper. It's very special paper that he used, of course, and he created the appearance of texture. I think here, even shadows, this shadowy house looks like it's, in the middle of the night, you can barely see it. Really skillful way of using these simple materials to create this effect. But his idea, as this book explains, was that this paper was as important to this work, the surface he was using was as important to the work as the materials that he was using to draw with. So it's not an accident that he used that paper. I saved these because I think these are quite, this one in particular on this side, quite special because of the way he did that. You can even see some of the, what would be like a watermark on the paper. If you look closely along here, you can see the letters that would be part of the paper, embossed in the paper. And the same thing here. This is a whole book. This is a really wonderful book. And he used these drawings as studies for his paintings. I have see if I can find one quickly, because I've seen some in here. Drawings from the Grand Jot, from Sunday in the Park with George. And there's a couple of well-known shapes of drawings. Like her, I think she appeared in that painting. But there's one I'm trying to find, The Woman with the Bustle, which you probably know. This is not it. These are drawings of a nightclub, of a cabaret in his life. I can't find it right now. Let me give one last sweep through and see if I can find something else. Here she is. This, I think, is an iconic part of the Sunday at Le Grand Jot, and started with something like this. But so, through his pointillism, he was also using that as a texture as well. So I think that that's kind of interesting that obviously texture was a part of how he expressed certain things. So I'm going to skip over to this book, This is the Women of Abstract Expressionism. A few years ago at Palm Springs Art Museum, there was a wonderful exhibit. Had traveled to 3 different museums, and this painting was there. It's by Jay DeFeo. It's I picked this one out in particular because these abstract expressionists would have used heavy paints, but this one, and again in the photograph is a little lacking, you can't really tell, but this one was heavy with the paint. So many layers of paint. That was part of the anecdotes that we were to tell, or that we heard from the docents during that time. It's a large, tall painting that you can see a lot more of. But many of the others, like these, I think imply a texture. Now I just flipped this page, so I don't know whose work this is. This is Elaine de Kooning, wife of Willem de Kooning. Okay. So that, again, that's suggestion of texture. I know that in some of my talks before, I have talked about Miro. I'm a big old Miro fan. So here we go again. I've shown pictures from this book. He was trying to, what he said, assassinate painting. So trying to change the direction of the art world. So he started doing these collages out of household items. So here's where I think that there's a connection to my work as a visual merchandiser, as a window display trimmer, taking household goods or household items and making them into something. Here, a feather and a hat pin. That pin is pinned into a piece of cork. These are impermanent, so that's something to think about. One of the things about the work as a visual merchandiser is that it was always an impermanent thing. We would do a window display, a piece of art, with the intention of it only lasting for a few weeks, and then it would be dismantled, taken away. Lucky for me, Stu likes to take pictures, and I have hundreds of pictures of things that I did back in those days. Here, there's paper on paper. He used things like sandpaper and flocked paper and all of that, household items. In this case here, he has, again, a sandpaper background and literally wire. And what I think, now with the wrong glasses on, but I think, how's that? A little better, a little glare there. This looks like it could be fabric, but I don't have the right glasses on. But he applied these things, so if these things still exist, they will disintegrate over time. And I think that that's part of the thing. We make art so precious. I do it myself. I make works and paintings very precious. I don't want them to ever be altered. But with something like this, nature will do the altering for you. And I have saved this as well because this is something too that corrugated board and various things brought together. You may or may not like these things. I'm not always sure myself, but I think that they're interesting to see how the things work together. The thing about Miro, for me in particular, is that he seemed to have a sense of composition that some of the others may not have. If I look at one of his prints, and I think, well, would I have done anything differently? Would I have put a line somewhere else? Or absolutely not. When Stu and I were in Barcelona and had the pleasure of going to the Miro Museum, Fundació Miro in Barcelona, we were listening to the headset. I'm going to tell a story about you, Stu. We're listening to the headset, and we got to a large white painting that had one black curvy line across the top quadrant, or the top third of the painting. And I'm listening to my headset, and I'm hearing them say that he spent 2 years deciding where to put that line. And was thinking to myself, I can understand that. I can understand that. It's not the only thing you're doing. You're not sitting for 2 years waiting for that to happen. When suddenly I hear Stu go, "Oh yeah, right." So, and I knew he was listening to the same tape I was. So but that is my observation, because I could say that his line on that painting was absolutely beautiful. And could you have put it somewhere else and made it any better looking? I don't think so. You might have tried. So that's my experience of these works here. So let me see what else I want to show. So there is something else that I want to show here. Maybe I'll skip a little bit around because texture has been a part of my work for a long time. And so for a period of time in the 90s, I did a series. There's some 36 or so pieces like this. I had this fabric from a department store. Anybody from San Francisco may have known Emporium on Market Street. And they closed in '95, and I happened to be the window trimmer at the time, and the window guy. And so when the display materials were sold off, I bought bolts of this brightly colored fabric. It's heavily dyed. It's the kind of fabric department stores would use in the bottom of display cases. You might see handbags displayed on them or whatever, always red at Christmas and yellow in the summertime. I started to do these paintings, and for me, this was also about texture. You can't, I'm sure, see it through the phone, but I took sand in the paint, and I added it to the paint. You can see maybe a little more of it here because I scraped at it, but I believe all of this color has sand in it because I was trying to build it up and trying to create a little texture. And then the silk cords outlined it because the edges weren't perfect. But then they added a nice dimension to it as well, I think, a nice framing to the images that I had there. So again, it's me playing with texture and color here. And in another more normal painting, using that, I put medium in the paint to thicken it up, to build up the paint on this painting. I resurrected this one just the other day from 2006. And it's one I've always liked. I like the colors, of course. Of course, I like the colors. Okay. All right. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the dimensional stuff. There are two things I want to show you. Again, at the Palm Springs Art Museum, there was an exhibit called Kinesthesia, kinetic art from Latin America. So kinetic art. It's either moving or it looks like it's moving. Fascinating because it was happening at the same time that the abstract expressionists were working in New York, but it wasn't being done in the States. It was being done in Latin America. It was also being done in Europe, in Paris at the time. So I've saved two things, and I have to explain what you're looking at here because I'm afraid these photographs do not show what you're looking at. But you can obviously see all the lines. These lines are made of some sort of a board or something that stood perpendicular to the flat canvas-like surface. I'm not sure if there was canvas behind it, but it stood perpendicular to the wall. They were shaped a little bit, so they had little curves. And it was the kind of work that, like op art, it looked different when you stood on one side or the other. So it's fun, it's a lot of fun. And I thought these were magnificent. There are a lot of beautiful things that go with that, and it's all about texture. There were many pieces in this exhibit. See how many I can find really quick, if I can find any, where parts of the art stood out. This one probably, this picture shows it a little bit. There's 3 dimensions here. These pieces stand out. It's possible that this might have had an electrical component. Yeah, this would have had an electrical component. Plexiglass, wood, and light bulbs. And so all of that with movement, with the movement of these backgrounds. Also here, Alejandro Otero, beautiful, a wonderful ticket from a show. These were flat, but the way he painted them made it look as though these black lines were away from the canvas and that you were looking through them to see the image behind them, but really it was all one flat surface. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah, more or less, Stu was saying. Okay, let me go. I found this to be a really exciting show. And so the other thing here I want to show you, which will relate to something else from Bauhaus from a little earlier. This artist, Jesus Rafael Soto, was using plexiglass and putting images in front of one another with clear spaces between them to create these different things. So what happens is you have shadows, and the shadows move, and that is how it becomes kinetic art, because as you walk along, and depending on how it's lit, let's see what's here now, depending on how the work is lit, that will determine what the art looks like. And so everyone has a different experience. What intrigued me about this was that these seem to be where in abstract expressionism there is the artist expressing her feelings on a canvas for you to see, and here these artists are inviting you to have your own experience, because each experience of each of these pieces is different. So then I have this here. I used this book recently in a talk, and this is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, and he did the same thing. He was doing, he's a Bauhaus artist. He was doing geometry, but then he started to do 3-dimensional geometry. He did work on plexiglass, and by doing it on the plexiglass and moving it away from the wall or from a surface behind it, it creates a shadow and it creates movement. So this is the one piece in particular that I want to show, and I think there's a similarity to the kinetic art, the Latin American kinetic art that was happening a few years later than this. Let me see if I can find out when's this. 1946, and these were made in the 50s and 60s. So, all right, so I brought this out because this was something I did in an afternoon one time. Again, I don't know how well you can see what it is, but I took one of these paintings that I decided needed to be reworked, which is something I've been doing lately, taking old works that I feel need to be updated, tearing them apart, putting them back together. So I did that here, and you can't really see too well, but if I run my finger here, I could show you. This is where a piece of fabric, which would have been this purple color, is glued onto the canvas, and then I painted it over so that it blended. So parts of this here have a bunch of sand on them, I added a little sand as I went around and did that to create texture and interest. So I didn't see what the time was there.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So that's good, because then I'm going to sit down, and I want to, since I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing for myself, I go back to my old thing of visual merchandising. When I did this work, when I started this work in the 70s, I didn't want to have to do anything else for the rest of my career. I had found a home. I was just definitely, that's all I was ever going to do. In a way, it's still going on. So I have a couple of examples of, I have a couple of books here. I think I'm going to show this book here and show this display. Here's a window display where there's a similar thing using construction paper. The visual merchandisers cut the construction paper to match the pattern on the shirts. This would have been in the 70s if you hadn't been able to guess by the shirts. And this is in New York, I believe, or Chicago. No, Chicago, at Carson Perry Scott in Chicago. Cool work. And another example of where there's an intersection. Visual merchandising is a form of advertising in a way. And I'm happy that I got into this on the tail end of this profession, because this sort of work almost never happens anymore. There's almost no one doing this. But in some cases, art was used. So this back wall behind these mannequins was painted by local graffiti artists in New York in, say, 79 at Bergdorf Goodman. So, bringing the street inside and all of that. And then on these pieces that are on the wall, so I think that helps me look at these and say, oh, this is not all that new, even though I thought I was doing something new for myself. And I know that other artists in the past have worked with wood as part of their art. So I'm not, the first one to be doing this. Maybe I'm taking a little bit of a shift on myself, but I put up a series of these. Some of these have soap stain backgrounds, some of them do not, and I haven't done soap stain in a little while, so I'm not sure if I'm going to continue to do that, but I'm working on more of that as well. So I just have a little gratuitous window displays from back in the day here. I don't know if this, if that plastic creates a glare or not. These are some of my work. This would have been in the 80s in Connecticut, in New Haven, Connecticut. And in a case, I'm going to bring this down. In a case like this, I would have been able to, and this one on top, this was just decorative. It was an institutional display, not meant to show particular merchandise, but to create a mood. And so with foam core, with the help of an assistant, I created the background and got the props and stuff together. I don't know what else is in here. This is old Emporium on Market Street in the 90s here. So that's it. That's all. That's all that I'm going to show the window displays. Maybe another time I will take a tour of my window display work. So I think that what I'm doing as I go with these wood assemblage works is that I'm using the wood still, but sparingly, and I'm adding more things like these patches that I'm sewing on. I have a piece I'm not going to show tonight that I'm working on. Maybe it'll be done by next month, and I'll be able to show it to you, of a diptych that I tore apart and started over. I cut up the old canvases and I've stitched pieces of it onto another canvas, and I plan to add, I'm going to stitch those on and add some other, perhaps some pieces of wood, and go from there. And that's going to be about looking at and experiencing the texture. This could also have to do with my being a Taurus, the earthy sign. I love this kind of, wood and grit kind of stuff. So, so those are my thoughts for tonight. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch me, and maybe you're joining me in a drink. Check out the website, timjleary.com. You can get in touch with me there. I'd love to see you, maybe make an appointment or whatever. So that's my story for right now. I hope everyone's having a great night. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.